Let's talk about Family Tradition. This is the
Mhm.
newest album from Trinidad's own Micwise. It actually released on his birthday, so you look at that, right? So for me, well, we spoke about this off air, right? So you only listened to it once. I had to sit down with this one, and I'll explain
Right.
why in a little bit. But yeah, this is one that you can't really like listen to casually. You have to really sit with it from start to end and really, really take in what's going on, right? So I'll just get this out of the way. This is easily his most personal and revealing album to date, right? And it's not an easy album to listen to either, right?
Correct.
And here's the thing, when it comes to Mike Wise, right? This is one thing I always admire of him as an artist, right? Is that yes, wordplay. I mean, the man have it, right? Punchlines, bars, all that kind of stuff. Flow, all that shit, right? He nails that, right? But what he does so well though is really dive into just the stuff that really triggers him. The stuff that just fuels his work, right? Whether it's capitalism, whether it's religion, whether it's just how hard it is to be a rapper in Trinidad, right? And just basically deep dark stuff, right? That people who just kind of casually want to listen to rap wouldn't really like gravitate to. You know what I mean? It always has to be stuff that either just kind of play in the background or just stuff that just kind of sound pleasant or easy on the ears, and you just have a nice flow to it, so you don't really think about it. You just kind of reciting words and whatnot, right? But it's not like really emotionally heavy stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's what Mike has been doing for years now, you know what I mean? From since I've been covering his work since well, I should say it's not well that's well when I started really was not that's this is not his that wasn't his debut. That will be like Leave, for example, that will be the first album that I covered from him, right? But like look, like when he dropped stuff like Heat 68, right? And stuff like that, that was some like really, really dark, bleak shit, right? And yet when it comes to his releases now, I mean I can imagine people who just sort of enamored by his wordplay and whatnot, wouldn't even think that that he would get this deep and dark, But in this case, he went all in with this, right? But what I will say too, before I jump into the just a track by track review that I did, right? Because your boy had to write some notes while he was listening to this stuff, right?
Right.
Um, the title is really interesting as well, right? Family tradition, right? And throughout the record, there's this running theme where basically you're hearing what sounds like a relative, right? Pretty much
Right.
just saying, look, just get these things off your chest. We don't understand why it is you're kind of like blocking us out and we're trying to reach to you and we don't understand and all that kind of stuff, right? But then you see how those conversations, or at least those remarks, I should say, lead to, right? But in a way, this album kind of feels like Mike is sort of purposefully distancing himself from, certain fans, right? Certain fans who kind of come in just to hear, wordplay and, just rapid fire bars and all that kind of stuff, right? It's almost like he's just sort of doing it on purpose, just to kind of get those away. Like he's kind of trying to separate the sheep from the goat in a sense, right?
Right.
But it kind of makes sense too. It's almost like he wants to know who his true fans are, the ones who really listen to his music and not just, oh, he's a guy who does real rap good though, so I real like he. It's not like that. It's not for those
Right.
fans. It's really for people who sit down and really, really take in what he is saying, right? So let me just jump into the album proper, right? Well, I know you listened to it once, so maybe if you have a couple of things to say from your first listen, I guess you could weigh in. That's fine.
Right.
So first track is, well, basically the intro is called "In the Air," right? And it's just a short intro, right? It opens with what sounds like a rock sample, where you hear this lead singer singing "There's something in the air," right? But the way it's very dramatic in the way how it's performed and how it's very downbeat in the way it's pitch shifted, right? So it's pretty much kind of letting you know that yeah, this shit's gonna be emotionally heavy, right? Which it actually is, right? And then then we actually hear that same relative. At least I assume it's a relative, right? Well, at least someone playing a relative, that is, right? This is like the first time you hear her, right? And she's just talking about you have to get your burdens off your chest and you can't just abandon your loved ones just like that, right? And yeah, that pretty much sets up what I think is the main theme of this record, which is just basically distance, right? Just sort of distancing yourself from your loved ones, from your peers. But it's not in a egotistical kind of way. It's just really more about, look, I have some stuff to tell you, and I already know you're not gonna like what it is I'm gonna tell you, but as you said, I have to get these things off my chest. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do, right? So up next we have Take Away the Pain, right? And by the way, I should mention there are some, well, actually handful, I should say, of producers that worked on this, right? So in this case, we have Screwaholic Beats, who comes
Right.
through with this sort of like disenchanted mix of like pianos and creaky strings and boom bap drums, right? And here, Mike is pretty much criticizing the many distractions that more or less hold us back from being better people. But in this case, especially when it comes to his music, and on this, in the case of this album here, it's all about he's really, really touching on mental health, right? But he also touches on how he has been dealing with his own mental issues for years, right? But in his case, he has the creative lane of music to express himself, right? To get these burdens off his chest, right? But not a lot of people have those opportunities, or do they like look to find a way to just release those innermost feelings, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's easy to go on social media and just watch some bullshit and get distracted by that, right? Instead of dealing with the problem, right? And I felt like this is what he's addressing here on this track, right? But yeah, this is a very emotionally effective way to kick off the album proper, right? So up next we have Feel the Pain, right? And I should also mention too, I love how this album is sequenced, right? So it's like a couple tracks would touch on a particular topic, and then it would just sort of evolve into like a next topic, and then into a next one, and next one. You just see the progression that goes along, right? So in this case, he's just touching on like just internal mental pain, right?
Mhm.
Um, I mean, when it comes to Micwise, he love him some soul samples, right? So this beat, which is produced by Devante, yeah, you hear these female vocal chops that sound even more burdened and way down every time you hear it. And then when Mike himself is like saying, feel it and deal with, yeah, like for me personally, I can't help but feel and deal with the pain on
Right.
this track, right? But here is where Mike proceeds to pretty much unearth this deep-rooted pain, right? Because this is one of the main establishing things about this album. It's just about this deep-rooted pain that he is about to reveal to the world, right? He talks about the depression and isolation he felt as a teen, and how he used to how he used to use rap as an outlet to speak his mind when nobody else will listen to him, right? But the second verse goes even deeper when he raps about how his music pretty much boosts his confidence, right? And you get a lot of like respect and fame and acclaim and all that kind of stuff, right? But there's still this underlying darkness that still troubles him, right? There's a line where he says, been living dormant probably since christening. And that alludes to another theme on the album that we'll get into in a bit, right? And near the end, he talks about how, he just figure, if I just make enough money, he could just leave the game and just kind of get his shit sorted out, right? But in his case, it's not the case. Well, in his situation, that's not the case, right? Because yeah, it's hard to be a local rapper, right? Sad to say, right?
Right.
So you have to hold on to his day job, right? So you kind of need to do this job that he hates, but at the same time, it's to do the rap where he has to address the themes, or at least the pain that he's going through, right? So is that kind of weird sort of conundrum that he's into, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a great song, but it's a really tough one to sit through just because of the themes that he's talking about, right? And then that same relative comes in at the end and says, you need to stop running away from all of this. I need to stop running from yourself, right? So up next we have Enclosure, right? Which is produced by Saipuda. If I got the name wrong, forgive me, sir. But yeah, Saipuda, right? He comes with a dramatic beat which has these like swirling classical musical bass strings and no drums, actually no drums, right? So it just sounds like a sample from some sort of like classical musical piece, right? So yeah, Mike is rapping about this pretty much his internal shell that he's built around himself for years, right? The opening lines are great, right? Where he says, "Spirit is within the scripted enclosure, patience dwindling from mixing with most y'all. Don't interact with fans like that, so they move anti-vax. This is where I got a chip on my shoulder." And if you know a thing or two about certain COVID vaccine
Right. Chip.
conspiracies,
Yeah.
which
Chip.
yeah,
Right.
I
Chip.
never ever ever took that shit seriously. People
Yeah.
used
Yeah.
to tell me that back in 2020. I was like, nope, I'm taking that
Yeah.
that vaccine. Thank you. I'm taking it. I'm taking it, right? But yeah,
Right.
anyway, you'll catch that one when you hear it, right? But
Yeah.
anyway,
It's leading into the conspiracy theories. A good line. Yeah.
yeah, it is, right? Yeah. But yeah, pretty much this is just pretty much this track is pretty much the foundation of this portrait, this fractured portrait that he's gonna paint of himself on this record here, right? And he actually makes mention of a certain moment that he will get into in the next track, right? which, yes, is actually one of the most revealing moments on this album here, and is one that literally will stop you on your tracks, right? Stop you in your tracks, sorry. Um, so yeah, it's very emotionally effective. But this one in particular is the one where Mike is just letting you know, look, you better get ready for this, sir. 'Cause this one gonna kind of hurt a bit, right? Um, and it's gonna leave you uneasy, right? And on a side note, right? Near the end, we hear this vocal sample. Thank you. And when I hear it close, like, oh shit, that's
Yeah,
from
yeah, I
Metal
remember
Slug,
this.
though.
Yeah, Metal Slug, yeah, the guy from Metal Slug.
Yeah, I was like, what are we talking about?
Yeah,
All right, yeah,
yeah,
cool,
I
cool. I
remember
love
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I fucks with that, fucks with that, right? But yeah, that's arcade shit. That's when I was in secondary
yeah,
school, right? So let me move
yeah,
on, right? Yeah. So up next now we have Monsters and Spirits, which is easily the most confessional song I have ever heard from Mike, right?
yeah,
It has this jazzy, bluesy beat from Slew. That's the producer's name. And this is one of three tracks where, he does work. Well, Slew comes through it on the production side of things, right? And let's let you all know those three songs are the most provocative on this entire record. Those are the ones that, people will be talking about a lot, you know what I mean? But yeah, it has this relaxed sax solo. And you hear like this really nice, well sung hook, I must say, from Mike, right? With some supportive vocals in the background, right? So the title of the track is quite clever, in my opinion, right? As the first half of the song is about monsters, and the next one is about spirits, right? But the first half is very unsettling, right? But the second half is very heartbreaking, right? But there's this emotional undercurrent that kind of keeps things kind of captivating, even though it's very dark subject matter we're hearing here, right? So I'm not gonna go into details into what the first verse is about, but yes, it does expand on what he said in Enclosure, right? Just that revealing moment, right? But it relates to something that happened to him as a kid, very traumatic. And in that particular verse, he raps about, yeah, just the confusion he felt because of that, right? And you see how that will eventually affect him throughout the course of this album, right? On the second track, no, sorry, the second verse, no. What that does brilliantly, in my opinion, is that it compares that incident to that of the alcoholism that I assume led to his father's death, right? So it's both spirit and spirits, right? Well,
right,
the
right, right,
spirits that consume his father, and yet his father's spirit still lives on in Mike, right? But
right,
yeah, Mike is a guy who does drink, right? So he actually kind of ends the track by saying, just kind of hinted at, will he be consumed by those spirits, right? But then no, what makes it even more unsettling, right, is that will he become a monster, right, as he alluded to in the first verse, right, or will he become like his own monster, right? But fortunately, for the song, in the case of the song, right, in the song's defense, there is that hope that that won't be the case, right? He will not become some monstrous person, right? Even though what he touched on in that first verse, with certain people, now you could kind of say, oh, it's because this thing happened to me. That's why I am a, how to say, I'll just use the word degenerate. That's why I'm that, because this thing happened to me. But in this case, with Mike, it's like, no, that's not me, and that's not gonna be me at all, right? But you also really see with the dad, right? Where in the case with his passing, it's just like, look, I saw firsthand what happened to him, and I'm not gonna let that happen to me at all, right?
right.
But at the end of the day, though, what really stands out in this track though is just the fear and the confusion, the hopelessness, right? That these, let me just see, these monstrous attacks, leave on your psyche, right? You didn't ask for these things to happen, and yet they did, right? And you have to live with them, right? So yeah, it's dark material, but it's very revelatory and very therapeutic as well. And just seeing it one time, this is the second best song on this record here. I really do love this track, right? Despite the dark nature of it, right? And I will say this before I move on to the next track, right? It's not like this unlistenable song, like a song that will disturb you and whatnot, right? But it's therapeutic, right? So once you listen to it, you'll understand where it's coming from. But it's the idea of becoming a better person, even though you saw these traumatic events take place, or at least you experienced them, right? And that's really the beauty of this track, right? So yeah, absolutely love this track here, Monsters and Spirits, even though yes, it's a hard song to sit through, right? So up next, with the second of this three-song session with Slew, we have Sin, right? And yeah, I mean, from here, yeah, things get even more provocative, right? 'Cause if it's one thing about Mike, yes, he loves to touch on religion, especially organized religion, right? He is
Right.
pretty much anti-organized religion, right? He's like that, right? But yeah, sin. This is a two beat track, right? So the first one has this airy kind of heavenly beat, but then it switches to a more soulful instrumental with horns and organs, right? But yeah, Mike talks about how, yeah, when you're brought up into Christianity, and I mean, if you, I mean, you know about it too, but I know about it as well. Yeah, you're pretty much taught at an early age that sin is this thing that you absolutely should not do, and if you do it, you will die, or the devil will come for you, and you'll burn in hell, right? But of course, when you get older, you understand that it's way more complex like that, right? But when you're
Right.
a kid, yeah, you're pretty much told, especially in Sunday school, that you must never ever sin, right? But most importantly, right, and this is something I can really relate to, right? Mike shows how this manipulation of young minds could cause people within the church now to look down on you with scorn if you get older and you decide to go on a path that is not according to their teachings, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, being a pastor is fine and great, right? But a guy like me who reviews secular music and movies, nah, we can't have that, right? So the way how Mike sings the hook at the beginning of this gives the impression that he's sort of like lashing back at the ones who told him not to sin, right? So he's like, sin while my mother pray, sin every other day, right? Almost like, yeah, fuck you again, back at all, right? But again, just going back to the sequence of the album at this point, right? Yeah, Mike's in a youthful stage in his life, right? At this point. So in the second verse now, he's grown up now and he's aware of the hypocrisy, which is sad to say, right? Which is evident in modern Christian churches, right? Where yeah, people will preach one thing and then sin as soon as they leave the church, right? So that's also something he addresses here, right? And yeah, he pretty much says at the end that as long as this hypocrisy continues, he's gonna continue to use his music to address this, right? So yeah, great track, and I know this is one that will rub some people off the wrong way, right? Which is exactly the point of this, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of rubbing people off the wrong way, up next we have Say Amen, right? Which is the final Mike slash Slew collaboration, right? And this features my second favorite of the four beats that Slew brought to the table on this record, right? The first one, of course, being the one for Monsters and Spirits, right? This one has this moody, contemplative beat, and it also features one of the most memorable and most sardonic hooks on this album, where he
Right.
says, "Before you say, dear Lord, what the fuck was you doing? After you say amen, what the fuck do you be doing?" I love that.
Right.
Like it's just
Yeah.
so direct. It just is a gut punch, but it works though. Or I should say it's just supposed to rattle you, especially like if you well, I'll get into what he's really saying here, right? So yeah, he's exploring how his rejection of organized religion pretty much made him a social outcast, right? But yet
Right.
the pride that he holds on to feels like like what he uses as an armor, sorry. Yeah, feels like this deadly sin, you know what I mean? And
Right.
and it feels more like a ticking time bomb that'll blow up, right? But at the same time, he had to hold on to it because it's just the way of the world, right? It's just the nature of things, and he just feels like he has to hold on to that, right? That pride that he has, right? But on the second verse, though, he debunks the idea that prayer is this instantaneous get out of jail free card that will
Right.
automatically get you, wash all your sins away, right? And get the devil off your back, right? That's the most important part, right? Yeah, I mean, sorry to say, but prayer don't work like that, right? And even if you don't
Right.
pray, you'll always do battle with the devil, right? As Mike says in the first few bars of the second verse, right? And then he reveals the dark side of prayer, basically saying what I said before, about this thing about prayer being this get out of jail free card, right?
Yeah.
But
A lot of that, naivety of the cult seat of religiosity. Look, again, not religious myself, but
mm,
I grew up as, even if I wasn't religious, even let us say if I was religious, I would be like reasonably acknowledging of it, which is it's more metaphorical and more meditative, and it's not meant to be like some magic spell or some, God is not a genie to make a wish.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
not some guy who just supposed to give you a wish. It's just things have to work. Again, if you believe in a God or some kind of true, ultimate, divine, blah blah blah. But it'll probably be like something like, remember that episode of Futurama, right?
Mm,
When you do things right, it's as if you didn't do anything at all. It'll
yeah.
be, it won't be a thing that'll interfere in the world. It'll be, just the idea of good, general good. Like, and I don't waste my time too much talking about religion too much anymore. But like, just the general conceit of good has nothing to do with nice. It's
That's
more
right.
about maintaining the world. The goodness is just the idea of stuff working. And if you carry the argument to its more metaphysical, philosophical ends, goodness is just existence. It's just, you know, the world exists. That not niceness. No. That's why there's people is getting all kind of shippiness about how my life's so bad and so on. So it's like, that would, at least the molecules in your system working, right? That's how I think about it. Uh,
Okay, okay,
or,
okay, yeah,
or the proteins, your proteins working, right? Well, for some people that might not be the case, right? But you get the point, right?
yeah,
The world goes on. Like, what we call good is just the world, going on as strife.
yeah,
It's not perfect. It's not meant to be heaven just yet. I don't know how that works if that exists. But that's how you should see it. Like that, don't waste your time getting into that, right? One way or the other.
right.
Anyway, yeah, that's. But I'm glad you really addressing this in this album, though. 'Cause I didn't listen to this album too much, so I didn't know what the lyrics was, or to get to listen to it. But I do remember that track back with the guy from Metal Slug. So is that?
Oh,
But yeah,
yeah,
but yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that.
yeah. No, that's all right though. That's all right, right? And I mean, even though I do identify as Christian, right?
Right.
But I'm not so like blind. I don't put blinders on and be like, like ignore the fact that yes, there are people who call themselves godly, or call themselves Christians, right?
Yeah.
Who kind of just do really bad and insidious things, right? But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what he addresses here.
That's the unfortunate part of a lot of it. Like most religiosity is at least the religiosity we are concerned with. When you're seeing some guy yelling into a microphone on Brian Lara Promenade or something.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
yeah. Mhm.
right. Most of that stuff is driven by trauma, right? It's sorry to say it, and I'm sorry to say it, but the real answer, I think the real answer is just immaterial, right? If people wasn't fucking scrunting all the time and turn our blind eye to a lot of human suffering, we wouldn't have so much like blatant religiosity in such a direct way, But I just my big old lefty position, right? So that's how I
Yeah,
think about it. Just that,
yeah.
yeah, whatever. Good. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's a wrap up this track here, right? So yeah, at the end of the day, he's just pretty much saying about how those insidious folks who call themselves Christians, right?
yes,
They are quick to do these things, right? And they tell themselves all they need to do is just pray, and all that will be gone, right? But the
mhm.
worst part is though that they're just gonna tell a naive public or just like naive Christians, yeah, just pray, just pray. That's all. Just pray,
Right,
right? And then
exactly.
they're gonna do the same thing
Probably
always,
probably
right?
the most the biggest talking point with that was is all of those in the United States. You have a constant slew of mass shootings
Mm?
and the usual American talking point, at least the populist conceit of the talking point, is thoughts and prayers, right? Which is less than useful. I mean, it's not even close to useful at all in terms of addressing this problem. You could do something about it. You don't have to, just say thoughts and prayers. But a lot of people just think like that. A lot of people think like with respect to, I always think of these religious people the same way you think of, remember that old joke? There's an old joke, two helicopters. Sorry, two boats and a helicopter, if you know that old joke. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, it's like no, you have to do something about it. It's the deity or whoever it is may provide, but you could get up and get not in their way. Their attitude is no, you just have to just this thing will work out, and it's like absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, that
Um,
that is naive. That is
yeah,
naive.
exactly, exactly, and it's like
I still say, I still hold on to the belief that God helps those who help themselves, right?
right, I see,
Just
right, exactly,
pray and just sit
right,
and wait. No, get
yeah,
off your
exactly.
ass and get
You got to do
some
something
done,
about it
bro.
because yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, if you know the two boats and a helicopter joke, it's a great joke, classic joke.
Mm,
But yeah, that is that.
right.
There's a lot of people who attitude is no, things will just work out. Like if it should fall into your lap again. If God were to exist, it wouldn't be a genie. It's
Thank
not
you.
fucking Will Smith in blue makeup, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's that, right? So it's there,
Yeah, so this is a track that I am not gonna recommend to my church going friends, but look,
right?
it took balls for a man like Mike to address this, and I'm really glad he did, right? So up next we have Keeper, right? So going back to sequencing, right? So we now talking about fake friends, right? In this
Right,
case here, because we was talking about semen and sin and that's the insidiousness of the church, right? Well,
right,
in churches, but now we're going into just fake friends and how they could lead you down a dark path, that could lead even deeper into your debt, right? Saipuda, who comes through again. His beat is great here, right? It has this soulful black exploitation inspired production, and it has the magnificent sampling of the "Am I my brother's keepers" line from New Jack City, right? For
right,
those who
right,
don't know, one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So once I picked it up, I was like, "Yep, I fucks with this track," right? But how it's used here, you hear the familiar one, right? That's where he's in the New Year's party and he with his friends, celebrating all that kind of stuff, right? But then there's another instance where he says it, and this is right before he kills G Money, who betrayed him, right? So you
Okay.
hear that later on, like when Mike is doing the chorus, you hear Nino's response to it where he says, "Yes, I am," and that's before he shoots him in the head, right? But yeah, I mean, this is not a new team when it comes to rap. I mean, a lot of rappers explore this whole fake friends thing, right?
Right.
But you know, in this case, though, just going back to sequencing, right? Um, it's just the idea that, yeah, you know what I mean, regardless of who you are, whether you're a rapper or a churchgoer, yeah, not everyone in this world is trustworthy, right? And you have to really be careful of who you trust, right? The way how Mike frames it, especially in the second verse, he shows how that untrustworthiness is really like affect your mental, right? You know what I mean? Because you
Right.
just
Yep.
like suspecting and just thinking that everybody gonna stab in your back, right? So I love how he touches on that in the second verse, right? Be a great track, but for me, the production really shines in this, right? So now we get I should say the second single on the album, which is the menu, right? And boy, this is a perfect choice of single in my opinion because of the two beats that are provided by Devante and Micwise. And I could be wrong, but I think that Mike did the second beat for this, right? Could be wrong, but I feel he did that, right? But yeah, those beats are the most attention grabbing because the first one does this sort of contemporary take on DJ Premier's timeless beat for Devils from Reasonable Doubt. And the second one basically does like this rap version of the bug rhythm, right? Which, in my opinion, is one of the best dancehall rhythms ever made. That came out in '99. You know, the big song from that was Bounty Killer's Look, which was
Right.
huge. But if you remember, and that also leads into what we're going to get next, right? Remember that track was banned in Jamaica because they thought that track was promoting gun violence
Right.
because the critics then did not listen to the damn song and understand that it's all social commentary, right? But whatever, is back in '99. That track still had, that rhythm still had. We all know that. But moving on, right? But again, going back to sequencing, Trent, I just love how he goes from how untrustworthy people are. That's basically showing that the world itself is corrupted, right? You know what I mean? And just
Yeah.
how he frames it is almost like this is dark medicine undercurrent that just kind of corrupts men to do the evil that they do, right? So as he says, the hook is the evil that men do, right? So it's like that, right? So at the end of the day, yeah, you can bop your head to it because of how nostalgic the beats are, right? That's what it is. It evokes, nostalgia when you hear these beats, right? But lyrically, this is some dark, grimy shit, right? Um, and I love it for it, right? But there's an interlude that comes right afterwards, right? Which is really fascinating to me, right? So the same relative from before, right, is crying to McNair and she's asking why he abandoned them to fight amongst themselves, right?
Right.
And then we lead to what is, in my opinion, the best track on this album. This is the first album single, Culture Part 2. If you remember Boga, he's the one that Mike
Right.
collaborated with on The Degree of Difficulty, which was my favorite album of 2023. He comes through with a truly sobering beat that literally forces you to kind of sit and take in everything that Mike is saying and really like take what he's saying seriously too, right? And yeah, you really should, right? Because Mike delivers this complex, multi-layered examination of Trinidadian society, right? But he's using music as a framework, right? So in particular, he's touching on Trinidad music, right? Especially when
Right.
it's consumed after Carnival, right? But he touches on how it's fueled and influenced by gang violence. But that violence now is so ingrained into our society and culture. We always like to blame Trinidad and say, oh, it's Trinidad and that kind of music. But this was just a part of this poorly structured economic system that hasn't been fixed in decades, right? So yeah, and it's to the point now, and I love that Mike addresses it too. That yeah, anybody who call themselves musical artists can't realistically make a living in their home country as a musician. You had to
Right.
fly out. If you're a soca star, you had to fly out. But if you're not doing that, you had to kind of stay here and do your thing, right? And pray that you get a buzz or whatever it is, right? And get paid if you do shows, right? Um, he also touches on how these artists are used in political rallies, right? He does this in the second verse, right? Just to reach a younger audience. So I was reminded of this when I listened to the track when I dive into it, right? Yeah, back in 2020, remember when Trinidad goes to the Balize Steppers dance? That was for
Right.
P&M,
Right.
and
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
video for it.
And it was
And
cringe.
it was cringe. It was catchy, but it was cringe. It was cringe. I mean, but the sad part about it though is that yeah, it's catering to a younger audience, but they're the ones, especially the ones who lived in impoverished areas in the country. They're the ones whose needs aren't met, and because of
Right.
that, they resort to crime, and that's where you get the whole Trinidad stuff from, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a excellent, excellent, excellent song, best song on this album, and dare I say one of the best songs I've heard all year. But it's one that really goes so in depth into just the nature of things when it comes to that, that you have to like just the more listens you give it, the more rewarding it will be when you really like get the message, the full message of it, right? So Ricardo, as somebody who are at least familiar with Culture Part 2 and the menu, yeah, and any thoughts on those two tracks?
Yeah. Just yeah, I take it in for what it was and just enjoy it. Yeah, you know, not super like it's not super like blowing my mind in that sense, but just well constructed, put together really well. Really, I dug it for what it was, and it's like yeah, solid message, solid. It had me just nodding my head like, yeah, that is correct, Mike. That is correct. Yeah, just solid lyrics and you come together with it nice. So yeah, that's just me today.
Right. So the album winds down here now with pennies, right? So we have YSP who worked on the He's Wise record. That's the collaboration that Mike did with with
Right.
Heezy Hines. You know, shout
Yep.
out to Heezy Hines, keep doing your thing. Yeah, so you know the record like real dark and shit, but this sort of kind of smooths out a bit with this sort of wobbly jazz fuse beat, right? Very Conductor Williams kind of inspired with the wobbliness in the background, right? So yeah, Mike finally touches on there's this stuff. What just giving insight into what fuels him to continue being a rapper, right? So he have tons of skill, but he's not gonna sacrifice them by as he says, selling his soul to some record label, right? That will like twist and distort his brand, right? But yet, as an indie rapper, and he has pride in being that. Is the issue again? People to listen to your music, and you don't have
Right.
a label pushing it, right? Um, and even worse, there's the pressure of making money, right? And it's something that I always say before. I mean, local rap still isn't fully supported and promoted, right? So at the end of the day, he just wants to be acknowledged as a great rapper. He doesn't want to wait till he's dead, and people, finally give him the flowers that he deserves right now, right? And slight spoiler, right? The title of this track is an actual punchline. I'm not gonna spoil where it happens, but when you hear it, you'll be like, I get that. So yeah, I chuckle at that shit. That was really clever. I'll give him that, right? But yeah, the struggle is real, and I felt it on this track. I really, really felt it on Pennies, right? So dope track. Um, and then we get the final interlude now where you hear the same relative say, Nicholas Dobson is not the person we're speaking to right now. So yeah, at this stage, he is just distant from his family. He's just pretty much pushed them away at this point, which kind of leads to the last two tracks, right? So up next, we have Glorify, right? So it's not from the same producer who did Enclosure, right? This beat is from Reason, right? But it's similar in tone with the sort of like melodramatic tone to it with the strings and how it swells and all that kind of stuff. It's very melodramatic, right? But no lie though, even though this track runs for about 2 minutes, it has a superb rhyme scheme that ranks as one of the best I have heard in a rap song all year, right? So I'll just reference a few bars here, right? If I butcher them, forgive me, right? A crutch wise saw, not one you can name, you could bet me. My way to the fetty, never one I lost. Tough times brought so many jewels in the music. That's not a Santana flip, but trust wild thoughts. I just gonna stop there. I just gonna stop
Yeah.
there. I just gonna stop there, right? Cause that shit hard, right? Santana, Wild Thoughts, think about it, right? Jewel,
Yeah.
right? Think about
Yeah.
it. Think about it, right? But anyway, but oddly enough though, this is actually like one of the two optimistic songs on the record, right? Because yeah, at this stage, Mike's portrait is complete, right? It's flawed, it's fractured, but it's complete, right? So in other words, these circumstances that he addressed, right? Pretty much made him into the man that he is right now, and he'll continue to walk on this life path regardless of who's next to him, right? Who's by his side, right? And yeah, he's distant at this point, but he's content, right? He did get a lot off his chest, right? And he will continue to do so through his music, right? So yeah, great track, but again, that rhyme scheme though is one of the best I've heard all year, right? And then we end with One of One, which is also produced by YSP, right? Um, and he comes through with a soulful three beat showcase, right, for Micwise to do his thing. I'll talk about the three beats in a sec, right? So yeah, I mean, through this whole cathartic process of like re-examining and getting rid of his demons, right? Yeah, he just sounds revitalized, right? He's ready to face the world again, right? But as the title and hook suggests, he accepts his individuality, right? As an artist and as a person, right? He's one of one, right? He's not gonna change who he is. He's not gonna do that to please anybody. You know what I mean? But just that overall message of it is very heartfelt and kind of inspirational when you think about it, right? But it's in the hook where he references, he says 96 Pac now. That is a really startling moment for me, right? Because yeah, I mean, if you know a thing or two, yeah, that's when Pac died, right? But he
Yeah.
also put out one of his best records that would be All Eyes on Me, right? You know, his double album, right? But anyway, um, but the idea is that, Mike is just ready for whatever, right? He's content with where he's at, but he's not done with pursuing his dreams of rap immortality, right? So yeah, while the first part of the song pretty much sounds hopeful, right? The second part shows that there are these dark elements that he has to face, right? On this road, right? And because of that, he's gonna be distant, right? And it's gonna distance him from some of his fans and his loved ones and all that kind of stuff, right? So if I just have one nitpick with this track though, is that the last beat is sort of plays out like this brief outro, right? So Mike is just sort of like casually rapping over the hook, right? But I thought he would have just give like one last verse because he gives two throughout, right? But I thought he would have just give one last verse just to kind of close things off, but he just kind of just does the hook kind of casually and then it just ends, right? Like for me, on the one hand, I wish he could have gotten one more verse, right? But on the other hand, you can kind of interpret it as just pretty much uncertainty. We don't know what's gonna happen next, right? So this is kind of like more like a to be continued or a work in progress, right? So it just sort of stops at a point, and I guess we'll see what happens to Mike in the next album, right? So yeah, in closing, this is a this one hit different for me, right? This one really really
Yeah.
hit different for me, right? And as I was touching on distance and all that kind of stuff, I could see some fans in quotes not really liking it as much as his previous works, right? And when I say fans, those fans, I mean those are the ones who kind of want to hear upbeat instrumentation and just want to hear rapid fire flows and punchlines, all that kind of stuff. But that's not what Mike is going for here. This is really personal, really deep, really dark stuff, right? And it's not done in this pretentious kind of way. It's just pretty much him really digging deep into his psyche and just pulling out all this stuff that, pretty much has burned him for years, right? And putting it out there to the world and just saying, look, this is the stuff that fuels me. This is why I rap about the things I rap about. And one thing I love about this record, though, is that, like, if you're familiar with Mike's work, right? Something like this was meant to happen. Something where it's just mostly bleak, just bleak stuff. Just the bleak subject matter that I've addressed in the past. But you're just gonna get this on full display on this album, right? But yeah, this album was kind of long overdue in my opinion, right? But outside of like the stuff that he mentioned in Monsters and Spirits, pretty much thematically, these themes have been brought up in numerous tracks and numerous albums in the past, right? But again, I know that there are some fans who, and you can understand it just in terms of music consumption. They don't want to hear that deep stuff. They don't want to hear that dark shit. They just want to hear something lighthearted and fun. Some shit that they could bop their head to and party, right? But this is not party music. This was not designed to be party music, right? That's what it is. But yes, to be fair, these themes have popped up on his records before, right? So if you know the man, you know his brand, you know the music, then yeah, you should not be surprised that he went this hard on this, right? But that being said, I could understand some people finding this to be too dreary, causing them, it might kind of trigger something into them too. I won't lie, right? There were a few times while I was listening to this where, yeah, I felt like anxiety was creeping up. Like I just felt that darkness, though. That's that inescapable darkness, and it got to me, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, that's what art's supposed to do. Art is supposed to, impact you in some sort of emotional way, right? So yeah, and this to me is art in my opinion, right? And it's unsettling, yes, it is. It's dark, right? But it's therapeutic, right? It's cathartic. It and the beauty about it at the end of the day is that it will inspire, hopefully will inspire other people to be like, look, there's this stuff inside of me, Dread. Let me like talk to somebody about it, right? Early on in the record, Mike did say that he addressed these things to his peers, to his loved ones, and it just kind of push him away. So this one is like, here's what I just gonna put it all out there, right? And yet still he's being pushed away, right? But where this album ends is like, well, look, fine. I could just move on my own, no problem. I am my own man now, so forget all that. I will move on my own 2 feet, and that's where it is, right? So I love that. I think that's a great way. That's a great team and a great way to end this record off, right? So yeah, as I could tell, despite the dark subject matter, I absolutely love this, man. This is one of the best for the year. This is a definite top 5 for me. So for me, I'm gonna give this a strong 4.5 out of 5, which is to me the equivalent of a 9 out of 10, right? It's out right now, so definitely check it out. But just be forewarned, this is not easy material. This is really dark and really unsettling, but it's art as well, right? And yeah, I mean, art is supposed to do that. Not everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows, and that's just how life is, right? So I just love that Mike just had the bravery to just say, look, this is what it is, right? If it come out of us, not wanting to be a fan of me, fine, right? But the real ones will rock with this, man. I know that for sure. So yeah, definitely check out Family Tradition.